Between 22 and 30, the 8 years of my life where I was making Vampire Weekend a priority, those years, in some ways, they seem kind of like a pause on my life.
You and me could be mistaken, been feeling that though.
So when I wrote this song, I was certain that it was not going to be on my album. I was like, this is just you having fun. This is you, trying to break your fever.
You say you think we better stay up late this weekend.
If you have a problem with the lack of democracy in Iran, what you really have a problem with is the white supremacy of the West.
Hey, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you, good to meet you.
Thank you so much.
I've seen you play live about 10 years ago with Vampire Weekend. And now I'm talking to Rostam solo. How does it feel to be solo instead of a band member?
Well, I don't think, for me, it was not a surprise. And I think for everyone in the band, it was not a surprise that that was where I was going because, even before the band started, it was obvious that, there were things that I wanted to do that it might be difficult to do and still be the member of a band. Between 22 and 30, the 8 years of my life where I was making records and touring and making Vampire Weekend a priority, those years, in some ways, they seem kind of like a pause on my life in a way.
I used to think that maybe it was better not to bother, to worry about the things that made me scared about the future.
I never expected you to say it was sort of a pause.
In some ways, it was a pause on autonomy, but it was also a very creative time for me. And, I wrote a lot of songs and produced a lot of records. And I think because people saw me performing on a stage with Vampire Weekend, that's kind of how they understood me. But really, for me, it was about being a producer, and producing those albums was what I, remember the most and cared the most about. So I've just continued to produce albums, and it's felt kind of like a natural continuation in some ways.
Is it just changephobia that made you scared of the future and funny?
Making an album is like an opportunity to make a beautiful piece of art. It's the canvas that I chose. I find it meaningful, and I specifically albums. I find them like to be the most worthy art form, and the art form that is in my life, the one that I would like to make the most impact upon.
Changephobia feels like a very rhythmic song. When you compare these kids we knew, that is a completely different structure.
These kids been out for so long, they don't speak like they're spoken to.
It has such a strange structure. It's like two choruses and a guitar solo. I was definitely worried about the structure of these kids being so strange that it might be hard for people to care about it. But a lot of people around me were really drawn to that song. And so I'm happy it was the first song that we put out from the album.
They don't speak like they've been spoken to by governments or emperors.
But what is the story of it?
I can tell you the story because I was sitting in this chair in my studio, and I had COVID-19, and I had a fever, and I'd spent 3.5 days sleeping all day and all night. And I decided to come to my studio because I needed a break from just being in bed. I was starting to go crazy. I still had this fever, but I started imagining this future in which a generation that decided they needed to take change into their own hands, and that they needed to make arrests of the older generation. It was inspired by Greta Thunberg, but a radicalized version of her.
So that's your postcard from COVID-19. Very personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I wrote this song, I was certain that it was not going to be on my album. I was like, this is just you having fun. This is you, trying to break your fever. This is not a piece of creative work for your record. But, flash forward, it became the first track.
You're from an Iranian family. You're from an Iranian history. You were born in Washington, by the way, but what's still left of that Iranian thing in you?
My parents actually, their life's work is in some ways continuing to tell the story of Persian culture. It's a very long-lasting, deep culture, and so much of the discourse about Iran is defined by Islam, which appeared in 600 AD, but Persian culture extends back thousands of years before that, and there's an extremely rich history. And so my mom, she writes cookbooks, and her cookbooks are not just recipes, but in some ways they are sort of like a historical record of ancient Persian culture. So it's something that's very much a part of my life.
You and me could be mistaken, been feeling right though. Never tried so hard not to spend the night so.
Imagine there wouldn't be any COVID-19. If you would be invited by the people of Iran to come over and do a show over there, would you consider that?
I think it's tricky because when you say the people of Iran, it makes this, it implies that the people and the government are united. And that may or may not be the case. As we've seen in America, we experienced 4 years where, the people and the government were not united. We can certainly say that. I think it's a good question, but it's a hard question to answer. But it would be something that I would consider. I mean, certainly I would want to perform there, but at the same time, I would never want to be in a position, and this goes for Iran or America or anywhere else, agreeing to perform was some kind of a tacit signing off on the behavior and the actions of the government.
You say you think we could keep going till the sun's out. The thing is that I've been here before and I dread the daylight.
In my personal opinion, a great distance, democracy-wise, between, for instance, our country and Iran.
Well, yes, but if you know the history of Iran, you know that in 1953, the CIA and MI6 subverted a democratically elected leader who socialized the oil of the country, and it was really capitalism, and specifically white Western capitalism, which acted to subvert democracy in Iran forever. So if you have a problem with the lack of democracy in Iran, what you really have a problem with is the white supremacy of the West, because there's a direct link. So, I would say if it is something you care about, I think you should, learn more about the history of white supremacy.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Rostam, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.